Wait, did you think I was going to do like a whole unboxing thing? Ain't nobody got time for that. Look, I've even got the first print done. This is carbon fiber PTG on PLA supports. I'm a little afraid to give Bambu this much credit, but the X2D turned out to be an absolute home run. Okay, let me interrupt you real quick. It's a day before this video goes live. I just got the pricing information for this printer, and it's wild. It is absolutely wild. A bit of background. I wrote this review thinking this was going to be $1,000. You know, the AMS and the X2D as a combo, $1,000. I was like, yeah, that's fair. I mean, Bambu is well aware that they don't really have much competition with the X2D, but this ended up being $899 for the combo, 849 euros, or 649 for just the printer, 629 euros. And that is Bambu just flexing. This is $150 more than the P2S. Just for context, this is cheaper than the Snapmaker U1. This is cheaper than the Prusa Mark IVS or the Core 1. It is cheaper than the Creality K2 Plus or Pro machines that don't even do everything that this one does. So just keep that in mind for the rest of this video. This printer is significantly cheaper than I thought it was going to be, and it is an absolute steal for what you're getting. So X is the class of the printer, high-end but a smaller Core XY. 2 is for the second generation components. It's the same platform as the P2S and shares parts with the H2 series. And the D is for true dual extrusion, which is a first for Bambu, at least on these smaller machines. So far, their cheaper printers have been relying a lot, I think too much, on the AMS for swapping filaments with all the speed and waste penalties that any filament multiplexer comes with. But this one has a full second hot end. Well, not quite. You see, the X2D is mostly a story of design choices that were made very intentionally. I mean, something like the H2C, or for its time the Prusa XL, are printers that are built much more in an all-out fashion. There are really no trade-offs for how much those printers can do, other than cost. But the X2D does deliberately make some compromises, and I think they're the right ones. So about that dual hot end. Well, the second one is a Bowden. And that seems weird because we've already mostly moved away from Bowdens for a good reason. They're less precise, especially at higher speeds. You can't print flexibles with them, like at all. And yeah, in the case of the X2D, that applies here as well. And there are also some stricter print speed limits for that right hot end. So, rightfully so, Bambu mostly refers to the extra hot end as the auxiliary hot end. I'm going to stick to aux hot end, thank you very much. Why did the X2D get a technically inferior solution here when Bambu already has a very capable extruder motor swapping mechanism thing from the H2D? It's not about weight, and I think the Bowden might even cost Bambu more to produce than the mechanism from the H2D. So this is only about size. Accommodating for a larger toolhead would either mean making the entire printer frame larger, so more shipping, more weight, more everything, or making the available print size smaller. But on here, the left nozzle, the main hot end, still reaches the whole 256mm cube, and the right aux hot end just misses out on the leftmost 20mm strip. I've also tried to see, what real differences in print quality that the Bowden brings versus the main hot end. And yeah, it's noticeable that extrusion control isn't quite up there, especially when you put the printer into one of its faster speed modes. But it's still totally solid. I do dual extrusion mostly for support material, and for that, it doesn't even really matter how good that second hot end prints. And when you use just the left hot end, the main one, you still get the same quality as on a P2S, which I've already reviewed, so I'm not going to go deep into the print quality again here, but it is totally solid. When you do multicolor printing on the X2D, you can still hook up an AMS to the left or right or both hot ends, but when you load at least one of the filaments onto that second hot end for a multi-material print, that still saves you the time and material for a filament swap on every layer. Bambu Studio will make suggestions for which filaments should get loaded to which hot end, so that it will have to do as few filament swaps as possible. In concrete numbers, these are the print times between using just one filament and one hot end, two filaments and both hot ends, or using an AMS with the left or the right aux hot end. And then I did it all again in the ludicrous speed mode. So as a rough ballpark, on this print size, going for dual extrusion with the second hot end about doubles your print times. but using an AMS instead triples them. Also, there's almost no waste for using that second hot end. Here's the total material used for each of the print modes. Though maybe one detail to call out, feeding filament by hand for the right toolhead ends up pretty annoying when used to an AMS. The right toolhead feeds from the right side of the machine into Bowden tube right there. Then it goes through the filament buffer in the center to an extruder on the back left side of the printer. So if you ever need to get to the Bowden extruder for whatever reason, that will be a bit of a reach around. At least the X2D is a lot lighter and a lot easier to move around than something like the H2D. Though I guess my main use case means leaving PLA as the support material loaded on the aux extruder the entire time and just choosing my main material from an AMS connected to the left, the main extruder. But enough of that, let's go over the rest of the upgrades that the X2D brought over the P2S, which, I mean, I did call out that machine for making a couple too many compromises where the P2S obviously left out features that could be reserved for the better X series printer, which this is. One of those was the left side panel, where, yes, the X2D now has an active chamber heater. The entire machine is rated for 1,600 watts of power consumption, so there is some good oomph in here to get the chamber up to 60 degrees Celsius. I tried that by printing some PPA CF filament. No problem there. I maybe should have tried that a little more than the 6 hours that I did. Though that filament is super hard to feed through all the bends in the PTFE tubes because you can't use an AMS with this. And pushing that in does feel very wrong, but at least it didn't snap at the start of every print in the Bowden tube before the hot end, like it did for me on the H2 series. PPACF and flexibles can only be printed in the left nozzle, which is really only going to be a limitation when you want to do multi-extrusion between PPACF and a flexible, because otherwise the printer can do all the other combinations. Interestingly, PPSCF is supported on neither hot end on the X2D, only on the H2 series. But you can print PVA on here as a support material, or as a main material if you want. You can also leave that loaded up in the second hot end in an AMS and keep it dry that way. If you've ever used PVA, you'll know that it's basically unprintable or unusable on printers that don't have a way to keep it dry, or on machines that have to repeatedly flush it out of the hot end with some other filament, because then the PVA chars and clogs your nozzle. Basically, this is one of the first affordable printers that actually makes PVA usable. And for that use case, I would actually go one step further and recommend that you get a dedicated hot end for PVA, only print PVA with that, and do as low temperatures as possible with it. Then inside the X2D, you also get the same blower fan as the P2S on the right side, and both chamber fans can switch from drawing in internal to external air, which on the P2S meant that the air filter wasn't actually filtering the air that was being pushed out of the machine. On the P2S, that has been addressed since with a new back panel design and an exhaust kit and filter that you can get from Bambu for a bit over $30, with the updated rear panel included for free if your printer still has the old one. In fact, they actually sent me one. Yeah. That looks like I got the hole mostly in the right spot. And on the X2D, you get the same fan and filter included, but with an injection molded case. I think this is a really good response from Bambu. The P2S is what it is, but they're now providing a first-party solution to what I think qualifies as an issue on the P2S, and they are including it as standard with the X2D. For me, the exhaust filter on the X2D solves the scratchy throat issue that I have when I print PLA. So the filter works, and it plugs straight into the Bambu bus and is controlled by the printer itself. And I do need to praise that, at least to me, it seems like they're inching towards a bit of a more open ecosystem. For example, I think it's a first that Bambu Lab is collaborating with Through the Frame to natively integrate the VentoBox air filter into the P2S. And you can get the VentoBox from today's sponsor, Voxel PLA. The VentoBox plugs in directly to the P2S as well, and is automatically run by the printer as needed, just like Bambu's first-party version. But replacement HEPA filters for the VentoBox are much more affordable, and the activated carbon cartridge is infinitely reusable with a simple refill. And you can even switch the vento box from exhaust filtering mode to multipass recirculation. All of Voxel PLA's products are manufactured and supported in the USA. PLA Plus and PETG Plus filaments and accessories like the Hula anti-vibration feet, and of course the Bento and Vento filter series, and are battle tested on their 250 machine strong print farm in Southern California, making highly detailed tabletop minis 24/7. All the PLA Plus and PETG Plus prints for this video were printed with Voxel PLA's filaments, and you can get free shipping in the US and another $10 off orders over $100 when you use code X2D VINE at voxelpla.com. Then the X2D gets a toolhead camera, so you can calibrate the printed geometry with the optional optical encoder plate. I've never tested how much of a difference this actually makes, but more importantly, the X2D can also auto-calibrate the alignment between the two hot ends by doing a test print and literally just looking at it for you. It's something that you could do as well, with your own eyes, but hey, this way is pretty convenient. The X2D also still has the image detection features that you know from Bambu, where it checks for nozzle buildup, whether there's parts left on the build plate before a print or spaghetti during a print. On the default medium settings, I found the spaghetti detection a little overzealous, but on the low sensitivity, this tends to work pretty well on the Bambu machines. Finally, you also get the better Bambu touchscreen. The P2S had just a cheaper panel that was honestly totally fine, but this one is noticeably nicer and more crisp. About the thing where the X2D makes the right compromises. Obviously, the Bowden Ox hot end is the main one, but also how the toolhead in its entirety is managed. It does retain the nozzle blocker flap and the lift mechanism for the second hot end, but the drive mechanics for that are not in the toolhead itself. Instead, it uses the XY motion of the printer to engage with what is now basically an entire toolkit on the back wall of the X2D. From the left to right, we have the poop chute and the grabber that is activated by the toolhead pushing towards the back. You've got the wiper for the left hot end right next to it, then the filament cutter, and finally the hot end switching pin, which it drives into and then pulls to the left or right to raise or lower the hot end and move the blocker flap. Also, there's the second wiper for the right hot end. So versus the H2D or the H2C, switching nozzles on the X2D takes an extra toolhead move because those larger printers are carrying around the nozzle lift motor on the toolhead. But that back corner where the X2D has to go to switch the nozzles happens to be where the prime tower is already being printed by default, so the toolhead is going back there anyway. Again, that just saves weight and space on the toolhead and cost for that extra actuator. And yeah, given the alternatives, this is the right choice they made, I think. Oh, and the X2D also doesn't get the extra top-down bird's eye camera or the close-up nozzle camera that some of the higher-end printers have. And it doesn't ship with a high-flow hot ends, though those make surprisingly little difference in print times. I did have two minor issues with my X2D unit. First, the right hot end clogged pretty quickly after a couple of prints. I swapped it out with a known good one, and I've not had an issue since. And the included AMS wasn't working right when retracting filament. Same thing, I grabbed one that I knew was good, and it's been fine. The AMS clearly would have been a warranty thing. The nozzle, I don't know, that might be on me. I'm just putting this in here in case other people end up having the same issues and this ends up sort of a repeating pattern. What's still amazing is that the X2D combo is just $899 or $649 without the AMS. Like, what other machines could even compare with the X2D? First of all, there's not really anything that has twin hot ends in this class, which honestly is just such a huge upgrade over having to use an AMS. And then, as far as the UI, polish, and overall smoothness of the user experience goes, the likes of Creality can't hold a candle to Bambu Lab. And when it comes to the Prusa Core 1 Plus, that does have a pretty smooth user experience as well. But to get feature parity with add-ons like a camera, an exhaust filter, MMU, a textured PEI bed, that ends up bordering on twice the cost as the X2D, but then still only has a single hot end and no active chamber heating. The only print that I can somewhat see competing is the Snapmaker U1, which at the time of me making this video still is in pre-order, so it doesn't really exist yet. But I do have one here, and actually by the time that this video comes out, I may or may not have published a video on the U1 as well. I mean, I do think that the U1 is the only printer that you can start comparing the X2D with. But then again, it's a little less hardcore, I would say. It does have 4 totally independent filament paths, but it doesn't come with an enclosed build chamber, no chamber heating, and no air filtration as well. Oh, and Ultimaker? Well, this might just be the final nail in the coffin. And compared to Bambu's own P2S combo, the X2D is just $250 more, which for all the stuff that you get, I think is a no-brainer. The heated chamber, proper exhaust filtration, or even just the extra hot end alone would have me instantly pick the X2D over the P2S. I mean, as much as an X guy, I don't want to have Bambu or any other single company riding their high horse and just dominating the 3D printer market like this. But at the same time, it would be disingenuous for me to do anything but to recommend that this should be the printer that you should get. And no, I don't think there's room in the lineup for an X2S with a single nozzle, other than if Bambu really wanted to create an Apple-esque price ladder, where you can get the P2S with an AMS, or for the same price you can get the X2D, but with no AMS, but then you still want the AMS, so you spend another $200, and then there's another printer you could upgrade to. The way that this is built, that second hot end probably costs Bambu way less than you might think. I would guess it's less than maybe $30 in materials at these volumes, and now the engineering is already paid for, so I just don't think it would make sense for them to sell you, or for you to then buy something like an X2S, if it ever existed, over an X2D. Real dual extrusion, when you have it, is just that much of a game changer. So yeah, links in the description below. It's a good printer, and it kind of feels like it was made for the exact things that I typically do with 3D printers. I'm super happy to see that real dual extrusion is finally coming around, because it just makes designing for all the ins and outs of 3D printing so much easier. That used to be the hardest part, but dual extrusion makes support materials so much more viable, and I'm just glad that that barrier is starting to come down. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, keep on making, and I will see you in the next one.